Rain pounded against the windows of the duplex penthouse in Itaiim Bibi, creating a liquid curtain that distorted the city lights of São Paulo. Albert Porto, 60, watched the storm from his spacious living room, his hands clasped behind his back, a posture that had long become his trademark during the 3 decades he had led Porto Incorporações. The wall clock, a gift from his late father, showed exactly 11:45 p.m., the precise time he religiously prepared for bed, following a meticulously planned routine. His eyes swept over the impeccably organized room where every object had occupied its designated spot for years. Italian leather sofas, carefully curated works of art, and books perfectly aligned on jacaranda shelves all reflected the methodical personality of their owner. Albert adjusted his burgundy tie knot, even though he was alone at home, a habit he'd maintained since his early days as a real estate agent. Then an unusual movement on the sidewalk caught his attention. Through the rain curtain, he could distinguish a small, hunched figure precariously sheltering under the building's awning. His first impulse was to ignore it. After all, homeless. People were not uncommon even in that upscale neighborhood, yet something about that silhouette reminded him of himself 40 years ago, when he had spent 3 consecutive nights sleeping at São Paulo's bus station, a newcomer from the countryside with only 1 suitcase and many dreams. Defying every instinct for self-preservation, and the voice of Regina, his personal assistant for 25 years, who would certainly have scolded him for such recklessness, Albert grabbed his umbrella and headed for the elevator. The night doorman Joe raised his eyebrows in surprise as he saw him leaving the building at that hour. "Mr. Porto, is something wrong?" Joe asked. "All is well, Joe. I just need to check on something," Albert replied. As he approached, the figure. He realized it was a young woman no older than 20, clinging to a backpack that looked like it contained electronic equipment. Her purple hair was soaked, and she trembled noticeably, though she tried to maintain a dignified posture. "Miss?" Albert called out gently, careful not to startle her. She lifted her face, revealing striking green eyes and an expression blending defiance with vulnerability. "I'm about to leave, sir. I'm just waiting for the rain to give me a break." "It's not safe to be out here at this hour," he replied, surprised by his own concern. "Do you have somewhere to go?" The young woman hesitated, and in that pause Albert recognized the wounded pride he himself had carried all those years ago. "Not at the moment," she finally answered with an honesty that impressed him. "But I'll be all right, don't worry." Albert readjusted his tie, a nervous tic that accompanied him in moments of decision. Against all his better judgment, against every rule he had set for himself, and every caution Regina would extol about safety and prudence, he found himself saying, "I have a spare guest room. You can stay there tonight until you get things sorted." The young woman studied him with a disconcerting intensity. "Why would you help a stranger?" "Because 40 years ago someone should have done the same for me," he replied simply. After a moment's thought, she extended her hand. "My name is Luna Santos, and I promise you won't regret this kindness." Albert could not have imagined how prophetic those words would prove, or how his meticulously ordered life was about to be completely transformed. As he led Luna through the building's lobby under Joe's perplexed gaze, he didn't notice the discreet smile forming on the young woman's lips as she took in the luxurious surroundings, nor the determined glint in her eyes as she quickly recorded some details on her cell phone. The elevator ascended silently to the penthouse, and Albert showed Luna the guest room, briefly explaining where to find fresh towels and bathrobes. When he finally retired to his own room, he glanced at the clock once more, 12:15 a.m. For the first time in 30 years, his routine had been broken, and strangely, he didn't feel nearly as uncomfortable as he expected. What Albert didn't know was that while he was preparing for bed, Luna was busy transforming his immaculate kitchen into an impromptu studio. From her backpack, she pulled professional recording equipment with the efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds of times. Her nimble fingers danced over her phone as she typed, "Get ready, loves, tomorrow begins the biggest twist of my life, and you're going to witness it all firsthand. New phase. Fresh start. Mysterious old angel." Morning arrived with its usual, Punctuality, and Albert, following his unwavering routine, woke at 6 a.m. sharp. He donned his navy silk bathrobe and headed to the kitchen for his morning ritual. An espresso made in his Italian machine, accompanied by reading the printed newspaper that Joe always left at his door at 5:30 a.m. However, when he opened his bedroom door, he was greeted by a different aroma, freshly brewed coffee mixed with a sweet scent he couldn't quite identify, and even more surprising, voices, or rather one voice, animated, youthful, and inexplicably familiar with his kitchen. "Good morning, my darlings. Today I'm going to show you how to make the perfect breakfast to surprise that special someone who helped you through a tough time. And look at this amazing kitchen I have at my disposal." Albert stopped in the doorway, mouth agape. His pristine gourmet kitchen had been transformed into a bona fide recording studio. Professional lights illuminated every corner, a tripod supported a state-of-the-art camera, and at the center of it all was Luna, her purple hair still on display, but now impeccably styled, dancing between the stove and the central island as she prepared what looked like an elaborate meal. "Luna?" he managed to stammer, still processing the surreal scene before his eyes. "Ah, good morning, Mr. Porto," she exclaimed, turning toward the camera with a radiant smile. "Everyone, meet my guardian angel." Isn't it amazing that he woke right on cue for the grand finale? Before Albert could protest, Luna pulled him into the frame, positioning him strategically next to a beautifully arranged table featuring pancakes, fresh fruit, eggs Benedict, and a variety of breads he didn't even know he had in his pantry. "But how, when?" he stuttered, nervously adjusting the tie he wasn't even wearing. "Don't worry, I used only ingredients I found right here. Oh, and I reorganized your entire pantry in alphabetical order by expiration date. I even found some spices from the 90s, you know." She winked at the camera, drawing laughter from followers who were already flooding her live stream with comments like, "What a charming gentleman." "Don't I want a blogging grandpa to..." Total shell shock on his face. The assistant's livid. "Ship Albert X Regina." The doorbell rang, making Albert jump. It was Regina, his assistant, arriving at her usual time, 7:30 a.m., to organize his schedule for the day. Luna dashed off to answer the door before he could stop her. "Good morning, you must be Regina. Your followers are going to love meeting the woman who's kept Mr. Porto's life on track for 25 years. Regina, a refined middle-aged woman who had always prided herself on her composure, was momentarily speechless. Her eyes scanned the transformed kitchen, lingering on the filming equipment, on Luna with her eye-catching hair, and finally on Albert, still standing awkwardly beside the breakfast table, clearly out of his element. "Albert," Regina finally managed, her voice tense, "can we talk in private?" Of course," he replied, relieved to have an excuse to step out of the camera's view. But before he could move, Luna was already narrating to her followers. "Guys, you have no idea what treasure I just found. Mr. Porto is like those period film protagonists, so proper, organized, old school in the best possible way. Look at him, adjusting an imaginary tie. Isn't that the cutest thing you've ever seen?" Comments exploded on Luna's phone screen. "Such a sweet gentleman. I want to blog a grandpa too. His expression is priceless. The assistant is fuming. Are you shipping Albert X Regina?" Regina pulled Albert into the office, shutting the door a bit harder than necessary. "Have you completely lost your mind? Who is this girl? Why is she turning your penthouse into a media circus?" For the first time in a long while, Albert found himself without a precise, well-formulated answer. How could he explain that something about Luna had awakened memories and feelings he'd locked away for decades? How could he justify a decision that was purely emotional, something he had avoided for so long? Back in the kitchen, Luna continued her live stream, now showing her followers the spectacular view from the balcony. "So, my darlings, do you want to join me in this new chapter of my life? I promise it's going to be incredible. Drop a like and comment below what you think will happen when Regina finds out I've already scheduled a series of videos titled Turning a Boomer into an Influencer." Albert's phone vibrated in his pocket, a notification from his stock trading app. But for the first time in 30 years, he didn't rush to check it immediately. He was far too busy watching from the sliver of the office door as his kitchen came alive in a way he'd never imagined possible. And, surprisingly, a small part of him was curious to see what else that purple-haired young woman had planned for his future. News of the new resident in the penthouse spread through the condominium like a viral post. Bernice, the building manager, who had held the position for 15 years with the fervor of a queen for her realm, called an extraordinary meeting for that very afternoon. The official agenda: discussion on filming regulations in common areas. The real issue: Luna Santos. "It's an outrage," Bernice vociferated in the condominium meeting room, her impeccably styled grey hair trembling with indignation. "Yellow-Ipe Residences has always been synonymous with discretion and elegance. Now we have an influencer turning our building into a reality show." Sitting next to Albert, Regina maintained a neutral expression, though her fingers drummed nervously on the folder of documents resting on her lap. She had spent the entire morning trying to control the damage on social media. The breakfast video had already reached 500,000 views, and Porto Incorporações stock was fluctuating in response to the sudden exposure of its president. "Albert," she whispered, leaning toward him, "the partners are worried. Mark called 3 times this morning, asking if you had a nervous breakdown or if you're being blackmailed." Before Albert could reply, the meeting room door opened, and Luna burst in like a whirlwind of energy and color. She had traded her purple hair for a pastel pink hue, and wore a vintage suit that, astonishingly, seemed to have come from the same tailor who once dressed Albert. "Good afternoon, everyone." She smiled, discreetly positioning her phone to capture the scene. "I hope I'm not late. I brought gourmet brigadeiros to sweeten our conversation." The murmurs of disapproval were cut short when a woman in the front row audibly panted, "My goodness, you look exactly like—" "Mrs. Margaret Oliver," Luna interjected, her smile faltering slightly. "You knew her, didn't you?" Albert, who had been drinking water, choked violently. Regina had to pat his back as he coughed, his normally composed face now red and disturbed. "Margaret Oliver?" he managed to say in a hoarse voice. "Your grandmother is Margaret Oliver." Luna nodded, her green eyes, the same striking eyes that had haunted Albert's dreams for 40 years, studying him intently. "The woman you haven't seen in 4 decades. Yes, she's my grandmother. Funny how destiny works, isn't it?" The ensuing silence was so dense one could cut it with a knife. Regina looked from Luna to Albert, her perfectly arched eyebrows furrowed in confusion and something else, concern, perhaps jealousy. Unperturbed by the drama unfolding, Bernice continued her tirade. "This only proves my point. This young woman clearly planned all of this. She's manipulating our dear Albert to boost her online audience." "Actually," Luna replied calmly, tapping her tablet, "I only learned about the connection with my grandmother this morning when she called me in tears after seeing the breakfast video. But since we're on the subject of manipulation, Mrs. Bernice, how about we discuss this document I found in the public records?" On the tablet screen, a series of irregularities in the condominium's management began to emerge. Bernice's face gradually paled as Luna continued her presentation with the precision of a surgeon. "As an influencer, I've learned to research thoroughly before making any accusations. And as the granddaughter of an investigative journalist, I inherited a knack for uncovering interesting details. Now shall we address the real issues of the condominium or continue pretending that my making videos online is the problem?" Albert watched everything with a mix of horror and admiration. In less than 24 hours, that young woman had not only invaded his perfectly ordered life, but was also dismantling decades of established power in the building. And the most surprising part, a part of him was rooting for her. Regina abruptly stood up. "I think we need to end this meeting and discuss these matters in a more appropriate setting." "Absolutely," Luna smiled, already typing on her phone. "How about an afternoon tea tomorrow? We could stream live and discuss all these issues with complete transparency. My followers would love to learn more about the story of this incredible building." As the residents dispersed into small, murmuring groups, Albert remained seated, his mind drifting 40 years into the past. Margaret Oliver, the name he had forbidden himself to utter for so long, now echoed in his mind like a bell. And her granddaughter, with those same defiant eyes and the knack for turning his life upside down, was now in his penthouse, transforming every minute of his routine into viral content. "Mr. Porto," Luna called softly, interrupting his thoughts. "I think we need to talk about my grandmother, and about why you never told me it was you who paid for my communications degree through that mysterious scholarship that appeared just when we needed it." The afternoon light was falling over São Paulo when Albert finally managed to find a moment of quiet in his office. Regina had left for a series of emergency meetings with the company's board, and Luna was busy recording a makeup tutorial in her improvised room. The businessman gazed out at the city through his panoramic window, an untouched glass of whiskey in his hand, a break in his routine that was becoming disturbingly frequent. His phone buzzed with a notification, a message from his son, Peter, who had been living in London for 5 years. "Dad, what's this about you becoming an influencer? I'm coming back to Brazil tomorrow. We need to talk." Before he could respond, he heard soft knocks on his door. Luna entered, now with a fresh face free of makeup and wearing an oversized t-shirt that read, "OK, Boomer," an irony that did not go unnoticed. "Sorry to interrupt your existential musings," she smiled, sitting on the leather armchair in front of his desk, "but I think it's time for this conversation." Albert adjusted his tie, his nervous tick now familiar to millions of followers. "Where do you want to start? Why not from the beginning? How did you meet my grandmother?" Albert closed his eyes for a moment, allowing memories long kept locked away to finally surface. It was 1983. I had just arrived in São Paulo, sleeping at the bus station and spending my days handing out resumes. Your grandmother was an aspiring reporter at the Morning Daily, working on a piece about young folks from the countryside seeking opportunities in the capital. Luna picked up her phone, but this time not to film. Instead, she opened an old photo, a young Margaret Oliver, with the same determined green eyes interviewing a slender young man in a worn suit. "I found this in her archives. You still have dimples when you smile, you know?" Albert took the phone with trembling hands. "She kept that all these years, along with all the articles about your success in real estate, and all the receipts of the anonymous donations you made to our family over the years." Luna leaned forward. "Why did you never reveal it? Why help in secret?" "Your grandmother was engaged when we met," Albert explained after a long pause. "She had her dreams, and I had mine. Our paths had to be different. But you never forgot her." "How could I? She was the first person who truly believed in me in this city. That report landed me my first job at a real estate agency. The rest is history." Luna smiled softly. "History that's about to gain a new chapter. My grandmother is coming to São Paulo tomorrow." The whiskey glass, finally, slipped from Albert's hand, staining the imported carpet. For the first time in decades, he didn't mind the mess. I'm not ready," Luna interjected. "No one is ever really ready to confront the past, Mr. Porto. But sometimes the universe conspires in mysterious ways. Look, after that social media scandal, I lost everything. I ended up right at your doorstep, and now we've uncovered this entire story. Don't you think it's time to stop hiding behind that facade of an unshakable businessman?" At that moment, the office door opened again. Regina entered, her usually composed face etched with concern. "Albert, the partners are demanding a board meeting for tomorrow morning. They want to vote on your temporary removal as president." Luna sprang to her feet. "That's ridiculous. Just because you're showing a more human side, don't you see the positive engagement we're generating? The company's social responsibility actions have never had this much visibility." "Luna," Regina replied coolly, "not everything in life comes down to view counts and likes. There are reputations at stake, million-dollar contracts, an entire company that is more profitable than ever," Luna interrupted, displaying graphs on her tablet. "I've analyzed all the indicators since we started posting the videos. As Albert President is trending, people are tired of robotic executives in expensive suits. They want to see humanity." Albert observed the clash between the two women with a clarity he hadn't felt in years. On one side, Regina represented everything he had built: stability, predictability, traditional success. On the other, Luna brought something he'd lost 40 years ago: spontaneity, the courage to take risks, the capacity to reinvent oneself. "The meeting is at 9 Mao, Regina announced as she headed for the door. "And Albert, your ex-wife, called. She saw the videos and is worried about your mental state." Once the door closed, Luna turned to Albert with a familiar sparkle in her eyes, the same sparkle Margaret once had when she sniffed out a good story. "Mr. Porto, how about we flip the script? I have an idea for a live broadcast that will make those partners swallow their expensive suits. All I need is for you to trust me and be willing to do something completely out of your comfort zone." Albert looked down at the whiskey stain on the carpet, then at the old photo on his phone, and finally at the young woman who had turned his life upside down in just 48 hours. "You know what? I think I'm already far beyond my comfort zone." The bustling terminal of Congonhas Airport pulsed with the typical energy of a Thursday morning as Peter Porto, tall, athletic, with the same shrewd eyes as his father but sporting a more easygoing smile, stepped off his flight from London. His presence attracted attention not only because of his physical appearance, but also due to the contrast between his impeccable blazer and the futuristic headphones he wore. "No, Adam, I'm not postponing the investors' meeting in London," he said fluently in English as he walked. "Something is happening with my father, and I need to resolve it first. Have you seen the videos? He's unrecognizable." At Porto Incorporações, the board meeting was about to begin. Defying all expectations, Albert had arrived late for the first time in his career, and he wasn't wearing a suit. Luna had convinced him to don a navy polo shirt and a more casual blazer, arguing it was time to present a more current and approachable image. "Are you sure about this?" he asked for the 10th time, adjusting the non-existent tie. "Trust me?" Luna smiled, tweaking the lighting on the discreet filming equipment she had set up in the meeting room's corner. "Have you seen the numbers from this morning? Now Albert President is trending. People are fed up with stiff executives in pricey suits. They want to see real humanity." Regina entered the room carrying a stack of documents, her worried gaze alternating between the hidden camera and Albert's new attire. "The partners are rising in anger and—" She hesitated. "Margaret Oliver is in the lobby." Albert's heart raced. 40 years vanished in an instant. She came." "Of course I did," came a familiar voice from the doorway. "Did you really think I'd miss the chance to see Albert Porto, the most methodical man in São Paulo, break all his own rules?" Margaret Oliver had aged with the same elegance with which she conducted her investigative reports. Her white hair framed a face marked by time, yet her green eyes, the same ones that had been passed down to her granddaughter, retained their sharp gleam. "Marge," Albert whispered, using the nickname he hadn't uttered in 4 decades. The moment was interrupted by the thunderous arrival of the partners. Mark Tavares, the eldest among them, entered first, followed by 4 other executives with grave expressions. They halted abruptly at the sight of Margaret. "What does this mean?" Mark demanded. "This is supposed to be a private board meeting." "Actually," Luna interjected, "the presence of my grandmother is crucial to what we're discussing. Today, just like this live broadcast that started exactly 2 minutes ago." "What?" the partners exclaimed in unison, while Luna spun her laptop, revealing thousands of live comments streaming by. "Gentlemen," she continued with a confident smile, "you're about to try to remove a company president simply because he's become too human? Fascinating. Our more than 5 million viewers would love to understand that logic." At that moment, Peter burst into the room, stopping dead as he took in the scene. His casually dressed father, a distinguished older lady he was sure he'd seen somewhere before, the young influencer who had turned his life upside down, and 5 pale-faced partners facing a live camera. "Dad?" he called, confused. "What's going on here?" Luna turned to him, and for a moment the two exchanged an intense look that made Albert recall the gazes he once shared with Margaret decades ago. "You must be Peter," Luna recovered first. "Perfect timing. Our followers have been asking to meet the son of the man who's revolutionizing the real estate market with his authenticity." "Revolutionizing?" Peter frowned. "He's having a public breakdown." "No, son," Albert finally said firmly. "For the first time in a long time, I am perfectly lucid." Turning to the partners, he continued, "You wanted to discuss my removal. Fine, but first, how about we talk about how we're using our social responsibility fund?" Luna uncovered some very interesting inconsistencies in the latest reports. Mark. Tavares paled even further. "You wouldn't dare..." Margaret laughed softly. "You really don't know Albert Porto. When he sets his mind to something, just ask the doorman at the old bus station who once tried to kick him out 40 years ago." Live comments exploded. "Team Albert. That son is a stud." Shipping Peter and Luna. "The boomer love story broke my heart. Mark T is turning as white as paper." Regina watched the unfolding confrontation with a mixture of horror and admiration. In just 48 hours, that young pink-haired woman had achieved what she had been trying to do for 25 years, free Albert Porto from his own constraints. "Well, gentlemen," Luna smiled at the camera, "shall we get this meeting started? Our followers are eager to see how a traditional company can adapt to the new era of digital transparency." What followed was a board meeting turned spectacle that no one could have predicted. While Luna moderated live comments, Albert, displaying a surprising ease, began to outline his vision for the future of Porto Incorporações. "For 30 years, we built luxury buildings for an increasingly isolated elite," he said, gesturing without concern for the camera. "But what Luna has shown me in these past few days is that there is a whole world of young talent in need of space to create, to innovate." Peter, who had strategically seated himself next to Luna, observed his father with growing interest. "Is he really proposing that we transform our developments into creative hubs?" "Not only that," Luna whispered back, showing him some graphs on her tablet. "Look at the engagement numbers when we mention social responsibility and digital inclusion. The market is ready for this change." Their fingers brushed lightly. On the screen, a moment of tension not missed by Margaret, who smiled discreetly as she noticed the blush on both their faces. Mark Tavares, however, did not share the general enthusiasm. "This is madness. Our traditional investors will never accept this pivot to digital." "On the contrary," Peter interjected, surprising everyone. "In London, I'm already securing investments for digital transformation projects in the real estate market. What my father is proposing isn't madness, it's the future." Regina, who until then had remained silent, suddenly stood. "If you'll allow me, I think I have something to add." She walked over to her folder and produced a series of documents. "For 25 years, I've kept a secret file. Every time Albert helped someone anonymously, every family he supported, every social project he funded without fanfare." Albert looked at his assistant in surprise. "You knew?" "I always knew," she smiled for the first time since Luna arrived. "Why do you think I never questioned those budget discrepancies for social causes? You may be methodical, Albert, but your heart has always been larger than your spreadsheets." Luna moved closer to the camera, her eyes glistening with barely contained tears. "Folks, are you seeing this? This is the real Albert Porto, not the hard-nosed businessman, but the man who never forgot his roots, the man who secretly supported my family for years, and who is now willing to revolutionize his own empire to create opportunities for others." The live comments erupted, crying over here. "Regina, the secret keeper queen. Peter and Luna are the new shipping couple. Mark Tavares, villain no more." Margaret rose, her presence commanding everyone's attention. 40 years ago, I interviewed a young man from the countryside who had an impossible dream: to build dignified housing in Sao Paulo. Today, I see that dream has evolved into something even greater. "And you?" Albert asked softly. "What happened to your dreams?" She smiled, the same smile that had haunted his memories for decades. I achieved them all. I became an investigative journalist, raised my daughter on my own, and watched my granddaughter grow with the same determination that once moved us. And now, she paused dramatically, I'm about to launch a podcast about social entrepreneurship. How about being my first guest, Albert? Luna nearly dropped her equipment in excitement. Guys, can you imagine the crossover? Margaret interviews Albert is already trending. Peter leaned in toward her, speaking quietly. You planned all of this. Not even in my wildest dreams, she replied softly. Sometimes the universe simply conspires in our favor. Speaking of which, want to join me on a collab tomorrow? I'm thinking of a video about young executives who are changing the market. Mark Tavares cleared his throat loudly, trying to regain control. This is still a board meeting. We need to vote on your removal. Actually, one of the other partners interrupted, I think we need to vote on replacing you, Mark. These documents that Regina brought show some very interesting irregularities in your management. The room erupted in heated discussion, but Albert barely heard a word. His eyes were fixed on Margaret, who smiled in that way that always signified she knew more than she let on. Did you plan all of this too? He asked. Let's just say an investigative journalist never really retires, she winked, and maybe I helped Luna uncover some crucial information. Regina moved closer to the two, her expression softer than usual. Should I start redecorating your office for the new digital era, Albert? I think it's time for some changes, he replied, watching Luna and Peter huddled over the tablet, planning future videos. But keep my old clock. Some traditions deserve to be preserved. That very day, the traditional June festival at Yellow IP Residences was about to begin, and for the first time in its 30-year history, the event would be broadcast live. Luna had transformed the party hall into a set that blended the traditional with the modern. Saint Jouin pennants hung alongside professional, lighting and even the Correo Elegante was digital. I can't believe I convinced you to wear this outfit, Luna laughed as she adjusted a straw hat on Albert's head. Albert, now clad in a plaid shirt and jeans for the first time in decades, grumbled, I look ridiculous, still trying to adjust an imaginary tie. You look authentic, Peter interjected, appearing in the doorway wearing a modern take on the country outfit that perfectly matched his London style. And the pre-event comments can't stop praising your willingness to change. Luna turned to respond and momentarily lost her words. Peter looked even more attractive with that production, and the smile he directed at her did nothing to help her professional concentration. Have you seen Regina? Albert asked, breaking the moment between the two young people. She should have been here an hour ago to review the party schedule. Your faithful assistant is busy having an interesting conversation with my grandmother at the corner cafe, Luna replied while checking her phone. Apparently they have a lot to discuss about the last 40 years. At the cafe, Margaret and Regina were indeed having a frank conversation about the past. Did you always know about his feelings for me? Margaret asked, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. Regina straightened in her chair, her posture impeccable even during such a delicate conversation. Always. It was impossible not to notice how he lit up whenever your name appeared in the news, or how he discreetly kept tabs on your family. And you always loved him, didn't you? Margaret asked softly. Regina's silence was answer. Enough. Back in the party hall, Bernice, now deposed as building manager after Luna's revelations, watched the preparations with a mixture of disdain and curiosity. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. With notifications since she appeared in Luna's very first video, she had become a charismatic villain on social media, complete with her own fan club. Mrs. Bernice, Luna called, surprising the ex-manager. How about joining a special segment today? Reconciliation Online, the followers are begging for it. Before Bernice could answer, Joe, the doorman, ran into the hall. Mr. Porto, there's a young lady downstairs claiming she's from Netflix. She wants to talk about a possible reality show. Luna and Peter exchanged worried glances. The exposure was growing faster than they had expected. And there's more, Joe continued. That group of young people who were camped out on the sidewalk, they've started a sort of peaceful protest. They're asking to turn the building into an incubator for influencers. Albert surprisingly laughed. You know what, maybe they're not entirely wrong. This building has underutilized spaces, and ever since Mark was removed, we've had several social innovation projects under review. Dad? Peter interrupted, shocked. Are you really considering that? Why not? Albert replied, his eyes lighting up with a youthful excitement he hadn't shown in years. Your mother always said I needed therapy. Maybe all this exposure is more therapeutic than any couch. Luna discreetly filmed the conversation, with her followers going wild at every revelation. Hashtags like Albert Revolution and Shaka Yellow Wipe for Everyone were already dominating social media. At that moment, Margaret and Regina returned from the cafe. Something in their expressions suggested that big changes were coming. Albert, Margaret called, her voice carrying that journalistic tone he knew so well. I think it's time we reveal the whole truth about the past. About why we really separated 40 years ago, and the true reason you began supporting so many families anonymously. Albert's face paled. Marge, you promised you'd never... Promises from the past can no longer control our future, she interrupted gently. Your granddaughter, our granddaughter, deserves to know the truth, and so do your followers. Isn't that what you've learned these past few days? That authenticity is the greatest asset one can have. Luna slowly approached, her camera capturing every moment. Grandma, what are you two talking about? Peter placed a supportive hand on Luna's shoulder, a gesture not missed by anyone. Regina took a deep breath, holding the folder that everyone recognized, the same one that contained the records of Albert's secret good deeds. There are more documents here, Regina said softly. Documents I've kept for decades, waiting for the right moment. The June festival was about to begin, yet a much older story was on the verge of being revealed. Outside, fireworks started to explode, illuminating everyone's faces in vibrant colors, colors that seemed to symbolize the end of an era of secrets and the beginning of something entirely new. The party hall at Yellow Ipe Residences was now packed with residents and guests, all dressed in festive attire for the June celebration. Luna's cameras captured every moment, broadcasting live to an audience that had already surpassed 10 million viewers. But the true drama was about to unfold in a more secluded corner of the hall. Albert, Margaret, Luna, and Peter sat at a table off to the side, while Regina remained standing, still clutching the mysterious folder. The sound of traditional music and lively chatter created the perfect sonic backdrop for that intimate conversation. In 1983, Margaret began, her voice thick with emotion, when I interviewed Albert for that piece about young folks from the countryside, something happened that I never included in the article. Luna held her phone with trembling hands, documenting every word. Peter, seated beside her, intertwined his fingers with hers, offering silent support. I was engaged, Margaret continued, to a powerful, traditional man. The wedding was scheduled for 2 months later, but during the 2 weeks I spent covering Albert's story, I fell madly in love with his determination, his integrity, his dream of building something meaningful. Albert lowered his head, reliving memories long buried. We fell in love, but duty won out. You had a commitment, a promising career. And you had an even bigger secret, Margaret softly added. Regina opened the folder and pulled out a yellow document. This is your mother's birth certificate, Luna. Luna took the paper with trembling hands. But that doesn't add up. The dates. Your mother was born 7 months after my marriage to Frank, Margaret explained. Everyone believed she was premature, but the truth, I'm your biological granddaughter, Luna whispered, looking at Albert with wide eyes. Albert abruptly stood and walked over to the window. The city of São Paulo glittered outside, a silent witness to so many secrets. When we discovered that Margaret was pregnant, we made the hardest decision of our lives, he said, his voice rough. She would go through with the wedding, protecting her reputation and that of the child. I would withdraw completely, but I would make sure that nothing was ever lacking for them. That's why all the anonymous donations, Luna realized. That's why you paid for my college, my photography equipment when I was a teenager. I couldn't be there, Albert continued, but I refused to be absent. Every achievement of yours, every important moment, I watched from afar. When you began to succeed on social media, I watched all your videos. Peter, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. So we're not cousins? Luna couldn't help but smile slightly despite the intensity of the moment. I guess that explains why we have zero family chemistry. Fate, sure. Has a funny sense of humor, Regina remarked with a half-smile. I've kept these secrets for so long, living a platonic love, just to see history repeat itself in a completely new way with the next generation. Outside the hall, the June festival was in full swing. Bernice was leading an impromptu quadrilla, her once domineering personality now channeled into entertaining rather than controlling. Joe, the doorman, had become a bona fide influencer among condominium staff, sharing humorous safety tips. Should we tell the public? Peter asked, glancing at the cameras. Luna took a deep breath, her content creator instinct battling with personal emotions. No. Some stories are meant to stay in the family. We can tell our version, our own story. And what would that story be? Albert asked, returning to the table. The story of how a cancelled young influencer found shelter in the home of a stern businessman and how together they discovered it's never too late to reinvent your life. Luna smiled. The rest is ours. Margaret reached over and took Albert's hand across the table, a simple gesture laden with 40 years of history. Sometimes we have to lose something so that it returns in an even more special way. Regina began gathering the documents. I'm going to store these somewhere safer. And now, if you'll excuse me, I think it's time I also allow myself some change. Bernice keeps insisting I join a podcast called Secretaries Who Know Too Much. The collective laughter that followed was interrupted by Joe, who dashed back into the hall. Mr. Porto, Netflix just doubled their offer for the reality show, and there's a line of young influencers circling the block. They're singing Eau de Casa to a funk beat. I think it's time to dance this quadrilla, Albert smiled, extending his hand to Margaret. And then, who knows, maybe we'll revolutionize the real estate market? Luna filmed her grandparents heading for the dance floor, where now Bernice was teaching TikTok moves to the older residents. Next to her, Peter wrapped an arm around her waist and whispered, "How about a collaborative video tomorrow? How I discovered my biggest competitor is actually my future girlfriend." The June festival at Yellowipe Residences continued deep into the night, no longer merely a tradition, but a symbol of how the old and the new could dance to the same rhythm, creating a new story together. Isige. Week after the June celebration, the penthouse at Yellowipe Residences had been transformed into a full-fledged multimedia studio. What had once been the formal dining room was now a professional recording set. The gourmet kitchen alternated between its original use and serving as a backdrop for culinary live streams. Even Albert's office, a sanctuary of methodical organization, now sported a bulletin board covered in colorful post-its with ideas for content. I can't believe I agreed to this, Albert murmured as he watched Luna and Peter adjust. The lights for another recording. Believe me, Dad, Peter grinned while checking the camera's framing. And the best part is our stocks have risen 40% since we started the Digital Transformation in Real Estate series. Luna, furiously typing on her laptop, looked up with a victorious smile. And that's nothing compared to what's coming. I just received an incredible proposal from an international production company. They want to make a documentary about the revolution we're causing in the market. Regina entered the apartment carrying a stack of documents, now digitized on a tablet, a concession to the new era she had embraced with surprising enthusiasm. Albert, the architect, sent over the plans to transform the commercial building in Barini into a creator's incubator. How are negotiations going with the current tenants? Albert asked, subconsciously searching for the tie he no longer wore. Surprisingly well, Regina smiled. After Luna's series of videos showing how traditional offices can benefit from the creative economy, 3 major companies have signed up for the pilot project. Margaret, who had practically moved to São Paulo, emerged from the kitchen with a tray of coffee. Her constant presence in the penthouse had become as natural as the cameras and lights. The podcast crew is on their way, she announced, and they brought a surprise. Before anyone could ask what the surprise was, the doorbell rang. Luna opened the door and nearly stumbled back. It was Bernice, completely transformed. The former hard-nosed manager now sported vibrant green hair, matching the hue Luna had when she first arrived, and wore a t-shirt emblazoned with "OK Boomer, but make it fashion." "What do you think?" Bernice asked, spinning like a professional influencer. "My channel, Deconstructed Landladies, already has 500,000 subscribers." Peter couldn't contain his laughter. "Mrs. Bernice, you are a phenomenon." "And that's not all," she continued excitedly. "That group of young people who were camped out on the sidewalk, I've hired 3 of them to manage the building social media. Now we're the most engaging building in Brazil." Albert watched everything with a mixture of awe and pride. In just a few weeks, his perfectly ordered world had turned into a creative chaos that surprisingly worked even better than the old order. "Luna," he called softly, "I think it's time to unveil our next project." Luna stopped typing, her eyes shining with anticipation. "Are you sure, Grandpa? You really want to do this today?" The word Grandpa was still new, still tugging at Albert's heart, but now it was a good kind of tug full of possibility. "Regina, please, bring that special folder," he requested. "The one with the projects for the new Influencers Investment Fund." Peter leaned in, intrigued. "Dad, what are you talking about?" "Your father," Luna explained, barely containing her excitement, "decided to create the world's first investment fund focused exclusively on underprivileged creators. And guess who's going to coordinate the selection process?" "No." Bernice's eyes widened. "You can't be serious." "Yes," Albert smiled. "You, Mrs. Bernice. Who better to spot promising talent than someone who went from a traditional building manager to a successful influencer in record time?" The ex-manager brought her hands to her face, visibly moved. "I don't know what to say." "Just say yes," Margaret interjected, "because it's all being broadcast live." Indeed, Luna had discreetly started a live stream and the comments exploded. "Mrs. Bernice, queen of social investment, crying over this transformation. The conscious capitalism we've been waiting for." Regina, returning with the folder, had a different gleam in her eyes. "And there's one more thing, show them the fund's name." Albert took the main document and read aloud, "Margaret Oliver Social Innovation Investment Fund, in honor of the journalist who 40 years ago showed that every story deserves to be told." The silence that followed was broken only by the soft sound of Margaret's quiet tears. Luna, tears glistening in her eyes, continued filming, knowing this moment was too precious not to share. "And now," Peter announced, embracing Luna from behind, "how about we tell them about the project's international expansion?" Albert's eyes widened. "International expansion, how so?" The news of the project's international expansion hit like a bomb not only in the apartment, but across social media. As Peter explained the negotiations he had been leading in London, Luna continued to capture every reaction, every moment of surprise and emotion. "European investors were fascinated by our approach," Peter explained, now completely at ease in front of the cameras. "They've never seen anything like an investment fund that combines traditional real estate with the creative economy and social responsibility. And the best part," Luna added, practically bouncing with excitement, "is that we've already identified 3 buildings in London, 2 in Lisbon and 1 in Berlin, all modeled after Yellow Ipe residences, half traditional apartments, half spaces for creators." Albert had to sit down. "You two planned all of this without telling me?" "Actually," Regina interjected with a mischievous smile, "they had an accomplice. Who do you think secured all the international contacts?" "Regina!" Albert exclaimed, genuinely surprised. "You too?" "After 25 years of keeping your secrets," she replied softly, "I figured it was time to create some of my own. In fact," she hesitated for a moment, "I accepted the offer to be CEO of the international division of the fund." The revelation caused another wave of emotion. Bernice was already on the phone, probably recording a story about the news. Margaret hugged Regina, whispering something that made both of them laugh like teenagers. "But that means," Albert began, "that it's time for you to learn how to manage your own schedule." Luna completed, laughing. Don't worry, Grandpa. I've even prepared a full digital productivity course for you. It's going to be our next video series, Teaching My Grandfather How to Use Google Calendar. Luna's phone rang. It was Netflix again. As she stepped away to answer, Peter took the opportunity to show his father more details about the international project. Look, he explained, opening blueprints and project plans on his tablet. Each building will have a different theme. The one in London will focus on technology and gaming, the one in Lisbon on art and music, and the one in Berlin on sustainable fashion. And all, Bernice added, now fully involved, will have an influencer building manager. I'm even developing an online course, how to turn your condominium into a creative hub. Margaret watched everything with misty eyes. When I interviewed you at that bus station, Albert, you told me you dreamed of building places that made a difference in people's lives. Look at what your dream has become. Luna returned from her call with an enigmatic smile. Guys, I think it's best everyone sits down. Netflix no longer wants just a reality show. Not? Peter asked, concerned. No, they want to produce a documentary series about the entire story, from the meeting of my grandparents 40 years ago to the international expansion of the project. They're calling it The Building, A Tale of Love and Digital Revolution. Albert, now accustomed to the cameras, felt his cheeks warm. They want to tell everything. Only what we want to share, Luna assured. The story of your love, the transformation of the building, the investment fund. But the most intimate details remain just ours. Regina, already taking notes on her tablet, began organizing. We need to prepare a timeline, sort out the locations. Regina, Margaret interrupted gently. Relax. You're not the assistant who needs to control everything anymore. Now you're the CEO who's going to revolutionize the European real estate market. Old habits? Regina smiled, but she tucked away her tablet. Luna continued filming, capturing every moment, every laugh, every knowing glance. Her followers kept commenting non-stop. It's like a real-life soap opera. Mrs. Bernice's masterclass on digital marketing. When? Gad, Regina, international girl boss is everything. Peter wrapped an arm around Luna as she filmed. Do you think your followers are ready for another surprise? What surprise? Albert asked immediately, his tone instantly wary. For the first time that evening, Luna switched off the camera. Well, she began, intertwining her fingers with Peter's. Let's just say the Margaret Oliver Fund might have its first air in about 7 months. Bernice's joyful shout was probably heard throughout the building. Margaret and Albert exchanged glances, memories of 40 years past mingling sweetly with the present. Regina was the first to recover from the shock. I think we need some champagne, non-alcoholic for Luna, of course. And for the stories, Bernice added, already grabbing her phone. As everyone celebrated, Albert approached Luna and Peter. Are you sure you want to bring a child into all this madness? Luna smiled, the smile she had inherited from Margaret. Grandpa, this madness is our family now, and besides, she winked, just imagine the videos, diary of a pregnant influencer with a CEO grandfather. 6 months passed. Since the announcement of Luna's pregnancy, and Yellow Ipe Residences was unrecognizable. The formerly traditional building in Itayim had transformed into an embassy of the new creative economy, with a constant flow of influencers, investors, and curious onlookers circulating through its corridors, now decorated with urban art. In Seoul, Albert's apartment, dubbed the Hub by Luna, a crucial meeting was about to begin. Netflix was set to start filming the documentary the following week, and the entire family gathered to finalize the last details. I can't believe I'm about to relive all this, Albert sighed, settling into the sofa. His tie had been replaced by a beaded necklace, crafted by one of the young artisans from the project, which he unconsciously adjusted the same way he had with his old ties. Luna, now 6 months pregnant with her hair a soft pastel blue, coordinated the meeting with her usual efficiency, even though she had to take frequent breaks to attend to her pregnancy cravings, especially for coccinas, which Bernice insisted on providing at any hour. We'll start with your story, she explained, looking at Albert and Margaret. The bus station interview scene will be reenacted at the original location. Joe even discovered that the old security guard from the bus station still works there. And then, Peter continued, consulting his tablet, we'll showcase the transformation of Yellow Ipe, culminating with the launch of the first international unit in London next month. Regina, now splitting her time between Sao Paulo and London, made a note on her device. European investors are especially interested in the part about how we transformed a traditional building into an innovation hub without losing its essence. Speaking of essence, Bernice interjected, entering the apartment with a fresh batch of coccinas. You won't believe it. My latest video on how to turn condominium meetings into TED Talks hit 2 million views. Margaret, who had become a mentor to the building's young content creators, smiled proudly. And to think that just 6 months ago you wanted to kick Luna out of here. I deeply regret that, Bernice replied, though her smile betrayed no real remorse. I even have the script ready for a special podcast episode. From Tough Landlady to 60-something Influencer, a reinvention story. Suddenly, Luna fell very quiet, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. Peter was the first to notice. Luna, are you all right? She's kicking, Luna whispered, emotional. I think she approves of the documentary script. Albert approached hesitantly. Even after 6 months, he still got choked up. By every moment of this pregnancy, his first great-grandchild, a new beginning he'd never imagined. May I? He asked, extending his hand. Luna took his hand and placed it over her belly. The smile that lit up Albert's face in that moment prompted Regina to discreetly pick up her phone and start filming. This is the kind of content that simply can't be left out of the documentary, she explained, as everyone looked on in surprise. Authenticity, remember? Speaking of authenticity, Margaret interjected, I think it's time we show them, Albert. He nodded and rose to retrieve something from his office. When he returned, he carried an old shoebox, the kind that holds too many precious memories to be digitized. For 40 years, he began, his voice thick with emotion, I've kept every newspaper clipping of your articles, Margaret. Every photo I managed to get of Luna growing up from afar. Every moment I couldn't experience firsthand, but kept close to my heart. Luna, already openly crying, blaming her pregnancy hormones, she insisted, raised her phone. This needs to be documented. No, Peter gently lowered her phone. Some moments are just ours, remember? The doorbell rang and Joe hurried in. Ms. Luna, there's a young lady downstairs asking for shelter. She said she saw your videos and came from Manaus to try her luck as a content creator. Luna and Albert exchanged a look, a knowing smile forming on both their faces. Send her up, they said in unison. Regina already had her tablet at the ready. I'll prepare the documents for the artistic residency program, and I'll get more coccinas, Bernice announced. No one should make important decisions on an empty stomach. Margaret watched it all with misty eyes. You know, Albert, when you told me at that bus station that you wanted to build places that made a difference in people's lives, I don't think you imagined the difference it would be. Albert took Margaret's hand, and to think I needed a colorfully haired influencer sleeping on my doorstep to fully realize that dream. Actually, Luna smiled, stroking her belly, I think we're only just beginning. After all, a new generation is on the way to continue this story. The late afternoon light streamed through the penthouse windows, bathing everyone in golden hues. A moment so perfect that not even Luna, with all her talent for capturing content, felt the need to record it. Sometimes, she had learned, the best moments are those kept only in the heart. It was a Sunday morning exactly 1 year after that rainy night when Luna had slept on the steps of Yellow Ipe Residences. The building's lobby was decorated for a special occasion, the official inauguration of the Luna and Albert Institute for Social Innovation, set to occupy 3 floors of the building. In the penthouse, now transformed into a space that blended classic and contemporary seamlessly, Luna nursed her newborn daughter, Margot, named in homage to her grandmother, who had brought everyone to tears when the announcement was made. The little girl had the same green eyes that had marked 3 generations of the family. "Ready for the big day?" Peter asked softly, sitting beside them with a cup of coffee for Luna. "Almost," she smiled. "I just need to finish feeding this little influencer. She already has more followers than I did at 20, you know?" The e-baby Margot profile had become a phenomenon on social media even before the baby's birth. Her arrival was witnessed by millions who were moved to see Albert, the once a stern businessman, crying openly as he held his great-granddaughter for the first time. Regina entered the apartment clutching her trusty tablet. After 6 months of directing the project's international expansion in London, she had returned for a special event. "The guests are arriving," she announced, "and you won't believe who just confirmed: the mayor and 3 secretaries. And the list of young creators interested in the residency program?" Albert asked, emerging from his office wearing a floral shirt, a choice by Luna that still shocked some of his old partners. "Over 1,000 applicants," Regina smiled, "from every state in Brazil and 15 different countries." Bernice burst into the apartment with her trademark energy. Her hair, now a vibrant green, perfectly complemented her sequined suit. "Guys, you need to see the lobby. The resident artists have created an incredible installation. And there's a line of people wrapping around the block." Margaret, who had become a sort of mentor to the building's young content creators, stepped forward to cradle her granddaughter. "Let me hold this princess while you all get ready. I've got decades of stories to share with her." Luna handed over Margot to her grandmother and went off to prepare for the ceremony. On her way to her room, she paused to look at the wall that once was occupied solely by Albert's certificates. Now intermingled with the old corporate honors were family photos, art prints by resident artists, and prominently framed in the center, the old bus station report. "You know what's amazing?" she remarked to Peter, who had followed her. "A year ago I thought I'd lost everything after that cancellation. Little did I know I was about to gain an entire family and a life mission." Downstairs, the first guests began to arrive. Joe, now the coordinator of humanized security at the Institute, led tours through the renovated spaces. Each floor had a different theme, one for artistic residencies, another for content production, and a third dedicated to social impact projects. When Luna finally descended for the ceremony, accompanied by Peter and carrying little Margot, she encountered a scene she would never forget. Albert and Margaret were at the center of the lobby, dancing to a soft 80s tune. Regina discreetly filmed, while Bernice narrated to her followers, "And so, darlings, love finds its way even if it takes 40 years. "Time for your speech," Peter whispered, handing the microphone to Luna. She looked out over the assembled crowd, young creators full of dreams, traditional businessmen learning to reinvent themselves, and residents of Yellow Ipe who had all embarked on this journey of transformation. Her family, both by blood and by destiny. "A year ago," she began, "I slept on the steps of this building, thinking I'd hit rock bottom. But I learned that sometimes you have to lose everything to find who you truly are." As Luna spoke, Albert watched, his great-granddaughter in Margaret's arms. Little Margot, with her curious green eyes, embodied everything he had ever wanted to build. A future where tradition and innovation, past and present, could coexist in harmony. Regina came over with a knowing smile. "You know, in all my years as your assistant, I've never seen you this happy." "Because I never was," he replied simply. "It took me 60 years to understand that sometimes the greatest success in life is knowing how to start over." The ceremony continued, marking not only the inauguration of an institute, but also a celebration of how one rainy night, a colorfully haired young woman and a stern businessman managed to rewrite not only their own stories, but also inspire thousands to find their own voice. Outside, the city of São Paulo pulsed with its characteristic energy. In the lobby of Yellow Ipe residences, amid laughter, tears, and countless photos, a new story was being written, not on the pages of corporate reports or social media feeds, but in the heart of everyone brave enough to believe that it's never too late to begin again. And when Luna posted her final photo of the day, 3 generations of green-eyed smiles facing the camera, her caption was simple. "Sometimes, life's algorithm leads us exactly where we need to be." Family is everything, Grandma.